Hi everyone, welcome to the Design and JavaFX code along. In this code along, we're just going to go over how to use JavaFX shapes, panes, action events, things like wrapper classes and constants, and it's really just meant to give you an idea of how to get started with your cartoon project. So we're just going to code a simple program that creates an alien on a plain or a white pane, and we're going to be able to move our simple alien left and right with left and right buttons. Okay, so to get started to code our alien, you can clone the stencil code on the website. And after you do that, I just want to point out that each of the classes are going to have package code along 4 at the top here, but for you guys, it might say code along 3, and this is our bad, but just make sure that you change the 3 to a 4 inside every class. So like in every class, it should say package code along 4, and that'll make sure that it runs properly. Okay, so we can see that we already have 3 classes here. We have the app class, which every program's gonna have. We have the pane organizer class, which every graphical program you'll write will have. Your cartoon will have one. And the constants class, which is going to store all our hard-coded values inside constant variables. Okay, so let's start by taking a look at the app class. In our start method, the lines inside our start method here are going to be very similar to any graphical project or very similar to cartoon, so they aren't going to change that much, so this is a good template to use. We initialize our pane organizer, and then we set the scene. We call getRoot on our pane organizer, which is just going to give us the root pane. And as you can see, instead of passing in hard-coded values for the app width and height, we pass in constants. So instead of saying 300, 300, we assign that 300 to a constant variable in the constants class, and then we can just say constants.appWidth. And this is just good practice, and you want to use constants for any hard-coded values in your cartoon project. Cool. And then it just sets the scene, it sets a title, which is moving alien, and it shows the stage. So let's just run our program now and see what we have so far. Yep, it's just a plain pane that says moving alien, and we're going to add our plain green alien to this, and we're going to have left and right buttons to move the alien left and right. Okay, so we can start by looking at the pane organizer class, which is our top level graphical class. The first thing you might want to think about when you're coding your pane organizer class is your root pane, because that's the base of your entire project. And in this case, our root pane here is the type pane, so it's just a plain vanilla pane. But if you want to use a different type of pane, you could go to the Java docs and look at all the different types of panes there are to use. And one type of pane is a border pane. So a border pane is just going to have a layout where there's a top, a bottom, left and right borders, and a center. If you want to know more about what this looks like, you can look at the Java docs. So we're going to decide to use a border pane. So in our pane organizer constructor, we set the root pane to a new border pane. Okay. Now let's think about the other instance variables that our pane organizer class is going to need. So we have our root pane as a border pane, but it would be good design to have another pane to hold our buttons and also another pane for our alien. So let's start with our button pane. We're going to make this a type H box because that's just going to be horizontal, and we want our buttons to be in a horizontal type of box at the bottom. Okay, so let's start by setting up this button pane. So I'm going to use a helper method in the constructor to set up the button pane, and this is also good practice because setting up the button pane is going to involve a bunch of lines of code, and you want to avoid writing a lot of code inside the constructor, so it's good to use helper methods like this. So we can just make our helper method private void this dot setup, or private void setup button pane. Okay, and this is just going to set up the button pane for us. So like I said, we want to use an H-box for a button pane because it's going to be horizontal. So I'm just going to say H-box button pane equals new H-box. And then we can set some stylistic elements of the button pane. So one thing would be the color. I'm going to say button pane dot set style. And in set style is going to set it to a specific color. And the color that we pass in here, I'm actually going to make that a constant. So in our constants class, we're going to make our first constant. So public static final string, because the color is going to be represented by a string, and I'm going to say button pane color. And we're just going to set it to FX background color. And this should be like a pink purple-ish color. And now I can just say constants dot button pane color. Great. So now we can set the alignment. And the alignment of the button pane is basically going to be where all the elements in the pane lie. So if I set the alignment to position.center, then this just makes sure that the buttons that we put in the pane are going to be aligned in the center rather than sticking to the left or the right of the pane. Cool. And then another thing I want to do, so we're going to have two buttons inside this pane, and we want to make sure that they're not sticking to each other. So we're going to set some spacing between the buttons. So I'm going to say button pane dot set spacing. And so I'm going to pass in a double value, and again, we want to make all our values constants. So let's say public static final double button spacing, and let's set the spacing to 20. And in your cartoon project, you can pretty much choose whatever values you feel are right here. I just chose 20, but it's really up to you. You can play around and see what looks right. Okay, so now I can say constants dot button spacing. Okay, and then the last thing that I want to do here is actually put this button pane on our root pane. So where do I want it to go on the border pane? I'm going to want the button pane at the bottom. So I'm going to say this dot root pane dot set bottom. Oh. And I'm going to pass in the button pane. Okay, and this, as we can see, is red here because the declare type is not a border pane, it's just a plain pane. And set bottom is only a method that the border pane can call. So we're going to make this the type border pane. Okay, so now let's just run our program and see if the button pane shows up. Okay, so nothing's changed and we can't actually see our button pane, which should be over here. And the reason for this is that there's nothing in the pane yet, so Java doesn't know the size to make our button pane. So let's actually add the buttons to our pane. Okay, so here we just want to add buttons to the pane, and I'm going to use a helper method for this because it's also going to have a bunch of code. So I'm going to say this dot setup buttons, and it's a method that's already been declared for us over here. Okay, so we're going to want a left button and a right button. So I'm going to type in button, and as you can see, it automatically gives me different imports, and we're going to make sure we import the JavaFX and not the AWT. I'm going to call it left. And when we call setup buttons here, it's expecting a HBox parameter, so we can pass in button pane Cool. Also going to make a right button. And now to add these two buttons to our button pane, I can just say button pane dot get children dot add all, and it's going to add it from left to right. So I'm going to say left button and then the right button. Alright, so this should graphically add our buttons to the pane. Now let's run it and see if our pane shows up. There we go. We have this purple or pink thing here would be our button pane, and we have our left and right buttons. Now, one thing I want to point out here is this blue line that surrounds each button when I click on it. And this is basically a focus traversable, so when I hit the space bar, the left button would actually get activated, and we don't want that. We only want something to happen with these buttons when you click on them. So to avoid this, we're going to set focus traversable for these buttons to false. So we can go into our set of buttons method, and we can just set focus traversable to false for everything here. So left button dot set focus traversable, that should be false. Same for the right button. And we can also set the pane's focus traversable to false. So now we want to add some functionality to our buttons. When we click on the button, we know that we want our alien to move either left or right, depending on which button. And we don't have an alien yet, so for now we can just make the app quit when we click on a button, but we'll change that later. So the way to add functionality is we just go left button dot set on action, and you'd pass in an action event, and again make sure to import the right one, which would be JavaFX E. And for now, to quit the program, we can just say system.exit 0, and we can do the same thing for the right button. And this is kind of what you could do for a quit button, because it would just make it quit the program. So if we run our app, oops. So if I click on either left or right, it just quits the program. Okay. But we're going to change these two like very soon. Alien. Our alien is just going to be a simple oval with two eyes in it. So this is going to be 3 different shapes, an ellipse for the head, and then a circle for each of the eyes. And since there are different shapes, and this is a composite shape, we're going to make a new class for our alien. So we can make a new class and call it alien. Alright. And this alien class would basically be a wrapper class for the alien. So if you think about the instance variables that we would need in our alien, it's going to be the 3 shapes that make up the alien. So it's going to be an ellipse. Again, I'm just going to import the right one. And we can call this the head. And 2 circles for each eye. There's a left eye and a right eye. Alright, and every class would need a constructor. Now we would want to set up our alien inside the constructor, but again, to avoid writing a lot of code inside the constructor, we would use a helper method. So I'm going to say this dot make alien, which is literally going to make our alien. And we can define the helper method, which would always be private. So here we're just going to set up our head, our left eye, and our right eye. And we're going to need a bunch of constants to do this, like the size of the head, the x, the y, the width. So before we go ahead and do that, I'm just going to define these constants. So I'll start with the x coordinate for the alien. is just going to be 150. And the y coordinate we can set to 100. And for your project to figure out what to make these constant values, you can look at the width and height of the app, and it basically starts in the center of the app, and you can also just play around and see how it looks on the screen. But for now we can just use these values. And hopefully the variable names explain sort of what the value represents. So this is just the width of our alien, the height, the radius of each eye. This is like the y coordinate of an eye. And we're gonna make an offset for each eye. And you'll see how we'll do the calculations later. Okay, so now let's go back to our alien class and code up our head, left eye, and right eye. So first I'm going to do the head. This dot head equals new ellipse, and the ellipse can take in different combinations of arguments. You can always look at the Java docs to see what to pass in, but we're going to pass in the x, so alien x, alien y, and the width and the height. And this is going to be the head of our alien. Okay, great. And whenever these lines get too long, just to stylistically make it look better and to avoid too many characters on the line, you can always just hit enter over here. And we can set up our left eye. Okay, so for the x coordinate of the left eye, I'm just gonna use the x coordinate of the alien of the head and subtract the offset value. So the offset, and then for the y, we made our own y value, I y, and then we're just gonna have to pass in the radius of the eye, which we set to 10. Alright, and I'm going to do the same for the right eye, which is everything about the right eye is going to be the same, except we're going to move it to the right by the offset. Okay. And now we should also set our colors. We want the head of the alien to be green, so this dot head dot set fill, and I'm going to pass in green. And oh, we got to import. I want the eyes to be, oh yeah, make sure that this says right eye. And the eyes should be black, and I believe the automatic color is just black, so we don't need to set that to anything. Okay, so something from our make alien method is missing, and that would be the pane. So this alien actually has to go on a pane, and we're going to make the alien go on its own pane. So this pane needs to be on top of the root pane in our pane organizer class. So we're actually going to pass in a pane from our pane organizer to make sure it's the same one whenever we make an alien. And we can just use a plain pane for this. So going to take in the pane as a parameter, and for our makeAlien method as well, and just pass it in. And finally, we can just add our head and eyes to this pane. So pane.getChildren.addAll. And we're going to pass in the head first because we want the eyes to go on top of the head, and then the left eye, and then the right eye. Okay, so that should set up our alien graphically, but we actually want to put this on the root pane in our pane organizer. So we're going to make an instance variable of our alien. And let's just make a pane for our alien and put that pane on the root pane. So I can say pane, or let's call it alien pane to make it more clear. And just make it a new plain pane. And we can say, we can just make a new alien. And we can pass in the pane. And then we can add this pane to our root pane. So this root pane dot set center, because our alien is going to go in the center of the border pane. And we can pass in the alien pane. Okay, so let's see if this shows up. Okay, there's our alien, and here basically the root is a border pane. At the bottom of the root is another button pane, and actually in the center there's another plain pane that you can't see, but that's what's holding our composite alien here. Okay, great. So let's go back to the pane organizer class. This was to make our alien show up, but there are a few design and logistical things that are a little wrong about this, and you should take a minute to think about what they are and how you could improve it. So first, like I said before, you don't want to have a lot of code inside your constructor, so we're going to make a helper method for this. So we can call it setupAlienPane. And we would just move all of this code into that method. Okay, and right now it seems like our code is working fine, our alien's showing up, but you need to remember to assign the alien to the instance variable because we're going to use it later. So I'm going to say this.alien equals that. Okay, and we can use this alien to move it left and move it right. And to do that, we're going to need move left and move right methods in our alien class. So let's make those methods now. We can say public void move left and public void move right. Okay, so for move left, we're just going to move each of the three shapes to the left by the offset. So we can set the x to whatever the current x value of our head is. So we'll say get center x, which is going to get the center x value, and we'll just subtract the move offset. And we can do the same thing for both our eyes. So we're going to set the eyes x to whatever the current eyes x is minus the move offset. And the same thing for the right eye. Okay, and once you wrote the move left method, the move right method is very similar, except that instead of moving it to the left by the offset, you'd move it to the right. So this would be a plus instead of a minus. So I'm just going to paste the same code in and change it, all the minuses to a plus. Okay, so those are the move left and right methods. Now let's actually use those methods to move the alien whenever the left or right button is pressed. And we would do this in our setUpButtons method. So here we had already defined what's going to happen when you click on a left button or a right button. So here when you click on the left button, it's just going to quit. Same with the right one. But instead of that, we actually want our alien to move left, right? So we'd go, okay, this dot alien dot move left. And when we click on the right button, we would say this dot alien dot move right. Okay, so now let's run our program and see how our buttons move. Okay, so now let's run our program and see how the alien moves. Oh, whoops, that's the debugger. Okay. Okay, so we have our alien, and then when we click left, it moves to the left, and when we click on right, it moves to the right. Great, and I'm gonna hit the space bar, and nothing actually happens because we set focus traversable to false. So in your cartoon project, if you got rid of the buttons and you wanted to move your shape, like in this case the alien left or right without the buttons, then you would need to integrate a timeline to constantly move that shape or move it in whatever cycle time you want. And I'm not going to code the timeline in this code along. This will be all, but you should refer to the lectures for that. And yeah, that's it.